An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
Hello and welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels. And today, which is right after Thanksgiving, so I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving and figured out how to socially distance while eating turkey and dealing with crazy governors from all over the country. So anyway, we'll stick to the topics. I am honored to have Nick Daugherty, who is the president and CEO, is that your title, of To Serve and Protect, I'm looking at him, Financial of Texas. So he's going to tell you his title, but I thought it was very, very important that we actually cover this.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Nick. I'm going to make sure that my notifications are off because somehow or another I'm going to end up hearing that. So do not disturb. Yay. All right. So please, welcome. I did not want to do your bio because it's so important that you are able to tell everybody kind of your background and why when it comes to law enforcement. And I will be interjecting because of doing my end of this for 30 years, and finances is the greatest clusterfuck that I typically find. So
Yep.
Go ahead.
So honored first off to be here. I've been kind of watching the work you've been doing from afar, and obviously being from Prairie, Texas, which is where I was an officer at. You guys have done quite a few trainings with us here, and so Nick Daugherty, aka known as the Financial Cop, and I'm the president CEO of Financial Cop. And my background as far as how I became so well versed in finances is I got a PhD in dumb when it comes to money. Which most of us do at some point in our life. And I came into law enforcement in 2003 as a rookie, having done a lot of stupid stuff with money to the tune of over $80,000 in consumer debt. 30 of that was wrapped up in car stereo equipment. My last car stereo was a $21,000 car stereo system, which was the stupidest thing I ever did with money.
But you had to have it.
Yeah, it was, we all got to have those little hobbies. Mine was just a very expensive hobby as a young kid. I was extremely fortunate as a rookie officer. My beat partner when I got released from training was a 20-year vet that became one of my best friends, and he kind of pounded financial wellness into my head. And I got introduced to the Dave Ramsey platform and fell in love with that platform, which is a really good thing I did because I had to sit across the table from my fiance, Carrie, and explain to her that the guy she wanted to marry was $80,000 in debt, and she was debt free. And you can imagine the look in her face. And I looked at her and said, "I got a plan." And she said, "You better." And I said, "I'm going to take the things I learned in this book with Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. I'm going to pay off all my debt." And so I worked about 1,000 hours of overtime and sold a bunch of stuff. And on March 3rd, 2007, we got married 100% consumer debt free. Fast forward to 2011, we got a new chief, and Chief Steve Dye, and probably one of the most progressive chiefs I've known when it comes to this topic. And he asked me to start teaching financial wellness to the recruits. And then I started teaching the whole department. And before I knew it, I really kind of found that I had a passion for helping first responders, but more importantly, I felt like that's what I should be doing instead of being a cop. And it was a very difficult thing for me because I loved being a cop, but the reality is there's just not a lot of people out there that are helping cops with finances that aren't doing so in a manner that really I just didn't agree with. And I wanted to help my brothers and sisters with that. And so 3.5 years ago, I gave up my sergeant stripes and left the PD full time. I still serve as a reserve officer, and we now run the largest financial wellness group in the country. We've taught about 10,000 cops in the last 3 years, and all the chiefs in Texas had to go through it. And through that, I quickly realized that training wasn't going to put food on the table, and so I ended up becoming a financial planner that I kind of knew what I was destined to become one day. And so I now run a 100% owned and operated fiduciary-run financial firm that's owned and operated by cops. We have several cops that work for me as well, and not only doing the financial wellness side, but financial planning as well.
So when cops come to you, they typically don't have $100,000 in a savings account that they want to know how to invest. So what I have found typically is when cops are ready to file for bankruptcy, one of the hardest slaps for them is figuring out how to come up with the $2,000 retainer on how to pay the attorney. So it's kind of like adding insult to injury. And yet, obviously, everybody has to make money.
Yeah.
So I think the first question that anybody that's watching this is going to say is, that's great, but if I'm in $80,000 worth of debt, how the hell am I paying Nick? And how do I do that?
Yeah, we really took a different approach. And I actually had a lot of people laugh at me in the beginning. I had a lot of financial firms that we had talked about joining really tell me that the model we were going after wasn't going to make you any money. It was unattainable. And that, the financial world, everybody focuses on the investments and how am I going to make money at first. And in my world, I always kind of gave the impression of the reality is that more cops need financial wellness than they need financial planning. And if you focus on building the financial strength and the financial wellness, you can get them to the point where they need the financial planning. And so we took an approach where we focused heavily on financial wellness, heavily on how do we get these cops to learn how to do budgets? How do we get them out of debt? How do we build up emergency funds to get them in the point where they can focus on the financial planning side of things? And so it's kind of a catch-22. You're right. There's a lot of cops out there that just, how am I going to figure out how to do financial planning? Well, the crutch of it is if we focus on building the financial strength and getting our house in order, you can get to the point where you need that financial planning. And we actually do a lot of our financial wellness initiatives when it comes to helping cops with budgeting and debt reduction. We do a lot of that for free for our cops, just to help our cops out, knowing that down the road, it's going to pay off dividends for them, which then obviously ultimately helps them become clients down the road.
Great. That's key, because I'm sure that everybody is thinking about that. So my question to you is, you got on the job, you're how old?
I was 23.
Did you come on the job with any debt?
Oh yeah, most of my debt I actually accrued before I became a cop. The problem was that when I became a cop, I learned this beautiful program called overtime, which fueled the habit even more. And because I quickly realized, well, I can just go work 20 hours of overtime every week. And that really created the cycle of doom in essence, because I got to the point where I was exhausted. I didn't want to do anything at work because I was doing nothing but working off duty. And my debt load was continuing to go up higher and higher because of that fact that I could go get me a free apartment by being a courtesy officer. I could work a bunch of overtime. And so I came into law enforcement with a lot of the debt, but the overtime cycle really kind of helped accelerate that problem.
Had you grown up in a household that was fiscally responsible?
They were. So I had a very good upbringing. I grew up in South Derby. My parents worked their butts off to do everything they could to provide for us. But it was, your typical middle-class neighborhood. We didn't exactly live the life of luxury. We didn't go all these luxury vacations and have a lot of, fancy cars and all that stuff. But we, parents did a phenomenal job raising us and providing what they could. But it wasn't like you would think in the sense of, one of those kids that just had everything handed to them, and that's why they became fiscally irresponsible.
I don't find too many kids that have had everything handed to them go into law enforcement to begin
True,
with.
very, very true.
It doesn't seem to be the profile that I've seen.
I'll tell you, that was part of the problem is, I grew up watching how my parents had to work their butts off to provide for us. And I'm thankful for that, because that really instilled the work ethic in me to know that I had to work hard. But at the same token, we take that, and you take these cops that come from these families like that, where they got to work hard, and then we give them these jobs, and especially in these major cities, we're paying some of these recruits more than they've ever made in their entire life. And now you throw a bunch of money at them, you throw overtime, and it's almost like winning the lottery. And you go, man, I went from, for me, I went from working at a grocery store to working at a sales job, making a bunch of money. Well, it's the same concept with our cops. They go from college to, starving college kids, or even just, right out of high school. And now we start paying them, in Dallas, our recruits are starting out at $60,000 a year. And they're like, holy crap, I've never had this much money. And they just go crazy with it, which causes those problems.
So interesting. I mean, so one of the, it was pretty many years ago, I had been married to somebody who worked for Madison Square Garden. And one of the things that had come up with the garden was, how do you deal with these basketball players, these professional athletes that had been catered to during college, now have been recruited, or making literally millions and sometimes tens of millions of dollars. So the first year, they typically assign somebody to them so that they get out of bed and they do normal things to get to practice on time. But they realized that they had to fine them when they didn't. So a $10,000 fine to them was nothing. They much rather sleep through a $10,000 fine. So they finally realized that they had to, exponentially hit them. So, they were then hitting them at $100,000 to sleep late. So finally something that hit them. So that kind of mentality of, hitting the lottery, that the adrenaline of the money, because there's, when I started thinking, I've got Nick coming on, and there's so much that's involved in money.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to address kind of what I see, what you see, and whether or not you actually get into the emotional side of the money. Go ahead, because then I'll ask away.
We do. And, when I teach my class, I actually hit on something that really hit close to me. At 5 years of service, I got to go through Dr. Kevin Gilmartin's Emotional Survivor for Law Enforcement training. And it really, to be honest with you, it almost saved my career, because I was in my first big burnout phase at that point. And going back and looking at what I went through in that training, and looking what I've gone through with finances, I realized that some of the reasons I was going out spending some of my money was because I was taking on the retail therapy of, I had to get out of that hypervigilant state where I was in the depressed mode getting off duty. So what better way to do that than to go buy some new toys to make me feel better?
So that was one of the things, is kind of almost finding out about spending habits prior to coming on the job. And then coming on the job, because what I have seen, so you saw at the 5-year mark, is when you are surrounded by truly untimely death, just shit that goes wrong, there is this sense of see it, want it, have to have it. Like all of these people that have planned for their retirements, for their futures, that now don't have a future. Mm-hmm. That it takes a toll on individuals. So that why deny yourself that speedboat when you're going to be dead anyway, prematurely? I mean, we know that actuary reports on the average span of an officer is less than the general population, though we are seeing a trend, thank goodness, up in that, but that I think has to do with all the wellness stuff that's been going on for years. But kind of that sense of earning it, that entitlement, and not the millennial entitlement, it's the vocational entitlement of life is horrible. Life is short, and who gives a shit? And like you said, yes, I can make X amount of dollars so that I can then have these nice things.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with kind of that putting off of immediate gratification, which causes some impulse control issues with that immediate gratification, which is an understatement, and that sense that I deserve this.
Yeah.
I have worked hard. I've just had to tell a young mom that her husband is dead. And I think I should be able to do this.
Yep. So 8 out of 10 of us are living paycheck to paycheck, or at least that's the American stats across the country. I think us cops are worse at that. I always talk about how I think cops are worse at living paycheck to paycheck for a couple reasons. One, it's hard to find people to do our job, much less in this atmosphere that we're in right now. And so we know that, for the most part, we have a pretty stable, secure job. The second reason we live paycheck to paycheck, and you guys deal with it up in the Northeast, with unions. In Texas, we call it civil service. And we have a saying in a civil service department: it takes an act of God to get fired, and even then you'll get your job back with back pay probably. So who cares if I live paycheck to paycheck? So that's the first step that gets us in trouble is I know I'm always going to get that check every 2 weeks. So what's it matter? The second thing that gets us in trouble with that is that 43% of us spend more money than we earn. And all we got to do is look at the parking lot for that one. We buy some really expensive toys to impress people at stoplights we're never going to meet. 66% of us have less than $1,000 in the bank to take care of the emergency that we're all going to experience. And you culminate that together, and it's that recipe for disaster. And then we inject that instant gratification of, I've had a crappy week, and by God, you know what? I've wanted a new truck for a while. I'm going to go do it because I deserve it. Look what I have to deal with out there in the street. And I deal with that with my cops in the sense of, one of the quotes that really got me hooked on Dave was if you live like no one else, later on in life, you get to live like no one else. If you sacrifice a little bit now, later on, you don't ever have to sacrifice at all. And it's getting the cops to understand that, if I can sacrifice for the next year or two, I can get myself on a good every dollar budget. I can get rid of this consumer debt. I can get my fully funded emergency fund. Now I can live like no one else, i.e., I can go buy the nice cars. I can go buy the toys. And now those toys aren't going to get me long-term financially because I sacrificed a little bit for a couple of years. It's similar to, you sacrifice to go to the police academy, and you do that, in Texas for 21 weeks. You sacrifice and fill training, and you give up a lot during that time period to get to the goal of being a cop. We got to do the same thing with our finances. We got to sacrifice a little bit. We got to get over this, poor, pitiful me. I deserve this for just a little bit of time. And then when you have that bad day, you can go buy that toy. I did a conference for concerns of police survivors last week for their national conference, and there was a Q&A session, and one of the guys sent me a message, and he goes, "Nick, I really like my toys, and I've got a spending habit." And I said, "You know what? I'm the spending habit guy. I like to buy things. I mean, you don't spend $21,000 on a stereo system and not like toys." And he said, "I like gaming computers, and I like to buy cars. Am I wrong to do that?" And my response was, if you've got a fully funded emergency fund and you're consumer debt free and you're budgeting, game on. Go buy the good car. Go game. You've earned that right to be able to live like no one else. But we've got to realize that we've got to sacrifice for a little bit of time to get to that point first.
So what was his response? Did he have the savings? Did he have all that in place? I'm going to go with no, but what?
I think he did, because of the way he responded. He responded that he didn't think that's the way I was going to respond to him. Just because most people think, well, you're the financial guy, you're going to want me not to spend. And that's really not what the financial cop is about. The financial cop is, I want you to buy nice toys and do those things. I'll say in Texas, I think we're doing the best job in the country of any state. I got
the fact that you're in academies.
Yep.
Is incredible. Like, as soon as you said that, I was like, well, there's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
There's an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah.
Because we don't address this, because linked into some of the finances is the side piece.
Yep. You know, I taught at IACP's Wellness Symposium last year, and I had all these major cities come up to me and go, "Man, this is phenomenal training. We need to be doing this. I wish we were doing this for, back in the day. And, how do you design some of these financial wellness initiatives?" And I kind of laughed and I said, "Man, at Grand Prairie, we've been doing this since 2012. This is second nature for us here. I mean, Texas mandated all 1,200 chiefs go through the class in their in-service. And so we really started to open the door to the financial wellness component. And at Grand Prairie, we call it the GPBD Fit Force. And we have the 4 pillars of wellness. Pillar number 1 is fitness, nutrition. How do we eat right? How do we make sure that's good? Pillar number 2 is the physical fitness side. How do we work out, do really good with that? It actually goes one and of some of the pillar. Pillar number 2 actually is the mental aspect. How do we make sure our cops are mentally strong? How do we address the PTSD, those kinds of things? Pillar number 3 is the religious side, or the spiritual side, which is a little controversial, but our department said, you know what, that's an important component. Mm-hmm. And then we went so far as to add that 4th pillar, which is the financial wellness. And if you can be strong on all 4 of those pillars, you're going to be not just a strong officer, but a strong individual.
How do you deal with the changing of how they think? Because it's really, I find it to be more of a thought process.
You mean like as far as their spending habits go?
Yeah.
A lot of it's ingrained in them from kids. And they don't talk about this stuff. And I kind of attribute it to, if you think about the PTSD and the suicide movement, we lose more of our brothers and sisters to suicide than we will in the line of duty ever, in essence. And the reality is that we really struggle with that as an industry because we didn't talk about it. And now we're starting to breach that. It's no longer so taboo to have conversations about this. It's okay to admit that you've got PTSD and those kinds of things. Same thing on the money. We don't talk about money because it's a taboo subject. Nobody wants to talk about money if they're not good at it, because then you're that person that's struggling with your finances. If you're really good with your money, you don't want to talk about it then, because then everybody expects you to buy lunch every day. But we've got to be able to have that. We got to have that conversation, and we got to know that you talking about money doesn't mean I'm going to give you my intimate details of this is my net worth, this is what I'm doing with my money. It's about helping each other work through those problems and solutions. No different than a rookie officer going to a veteran officer and saying, "Hey, I had this call with this family disturbance and this is what happened. This is how I handled it, but I just don't feel like that was the right way to handle it. What would you do as a 30-year veteran?" Well, finding people like us or other knowledgeable people that know a lot about money and going, "This is what I think I want to do with the money," or "This is what I did with the money and it might have been stupid. How do I change that? How do I do it differently next time?" And breaking that barrier and going, it's okay to ask those questions and have those conversations.
So you're in Texas. I'm sitting in Jersey. So I sit close to Atlantic City and the gambling casinos up in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
You're sitting near Indian reservations all over the place. So one of the things certainly that I notice is the incredible amount of gambling that goes on. And the gambling does several things. It's an adrenaline rush. So we know that these guys love the adrenaline. And they feel important, that they get the free rooms, they'll get the free meals, they'll get all that. Now, they don't really talk about the amount that they have to gamble, that each bet has to be a certain amount. What they kind of love is being treated like they are special. And I have dealt with far too many people where gambling has been a truly significant issue. And kind of chasing the high that goes along with it. I remember one of my guys won $80,000. It was a huge hit. And his wife happened to, she was on the phone or what have you. I was talking to him, and when he wasn't on the phone, she said to me, he won $86,000. But what he hasn't told you is how much money he has lost in order to win the $86,000.
Yep.
And it became really sad to kind of see not the money stuff, but how they needed to feel special. How these people were catering, like to go down for like the heated mattress pad or whatever the hell they were giving away because they were getting it for free, and somewhat of a cop's mentality, which isn't great, which is the, if it's free, it's for me. But as you know, in economics, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
So you've paid tenfold for what you're getting. And yes, you're getting the quote unquote free suite. But what you don't understand is you're not getting the whale's suite. You're not getting the 2,500 square foot suite. You're getting a room with a little sitting area. But it's not about that. It's that feeling of importance. It's that feeling of, look at me.
Yeah.
So what I kind of was thinking about when we were going to talk was really kind of all of us, officer, civilian, what have you, understanding, what does money represent? Power, control, manipulation, respect. And what was the message growing up that surrounded finances?
Yep.
Because all of those pieces truly play out.
Yep.
So I kind of wanted to touch base on that and then go into really truly the dark side, which I'll address with Texas. I know how our system is set up for retirement, but more so I know how our system is set up if somebody dies by suicide.
Yeah.
So, and the financial components of that. So it's kind of a lot, but that I wanted to throw all those out to you. So kind of starting with kind of this emotional baggage that truly centers around finances.
You talked about the power, the respect, the control, all things that we get while we're on duty wearing the badge. You go to a scene for a call for service, and most of the time, times change obviously with what's going on out there now. Most of the time we get the respect, we have the power, we have the ability to control that. And you translate that now into your personal life, and we look for those same kinds of things. And especially for my married couples, I see a lot of issues when it comes to money and marriage. And one of the things I talk about when it comes to that is that we need to understand as cops that when we go into our marriage and we talk about money, there's not a chief and an assistant chief in this relationship. There's two chiefs. We're married. We've got to treat this together like we earned it together. We plan it together. We spend it together. But far too often, especially if we're dealing with PTSD and all those kinds of issues, we take that money and we turn it into a control issue, especially if we're making more money than our spouses as well, instead of turning it into a blessing. And money can really, if you work at it together and you communicate, it actually can open up the marriage and create even more trust and closeness instead of the control aspect of it. And so it correlates to that power and control and respect in the money aspect of it. I don't know that I would call myself fortunate in the sense that I haven't dealt a lot with the gambling side of things. Not because it doesn't exist, but because I think it's just one of those things that's just, it's like being an alcoholic or addicted to drug. It's just, it doesn't come out until it's too late and you realize that officer committed suicide. Oh, it was because of gambling or something like that. And oftentimes, as much as I hate to knock my brothers and sisters, but how many times do we know of an officer commit suicide and there was money issues or there was gambling issues or alcohol issues and we knew about it and we just chose to, oh, it's just him, it's okay. We're not gonna be the bigger person and address it.
That certainly is there. But what I have found is that the gambler does not share, like the wife had shared, doesn't share the 6-figure loss that same year as the $86,000 hit. So there's a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of stuff that goes around that. And it also goes into that side piece that if officers have a another individual that they are with during, their marital life, or if they're in a committed relationship, that is Jewish expression, being a big starker. That being the big starker and going down to, Atlantic City and having the room, and, they can get the shows, they can get the limousine, they can get all of that. And that then kind of, it just, there's this whole other side. And yet I think to myself, and I don't have this answer, who is the highest paid sworn officer in the United States? I don't know. Do you know the answer?
I would beg to imagine it's either one of the federal chiefs or one of the chiefs of one of the major cities like LA, NYPD, or something like that.
So I want to say, so LA, so you're probably at over 250, but I don't think anybody's in the threes.
Yeah.
I mean, and I could be wrong. I figure the president of the United States makes $400,000 a year.
Yeah.
We can even take the president of the United States, but he gets plenty of perks. But if you're dating a cop, that's what I'm getting at. You're not dating Bill Gates.
Yeah.
That there's got to be some realistic understanding, even with a gazillion hours of overtime, you still are dating a cop, not the CEO.
Yeah, but I get, there's some misconceptions with that. And so, being a financial advisor, I work with several high net worth clients, several millionaires.
Okay.
I also manage the retirement accounts and or consult with over 24 chiefs of police in the state of Texas. So I work with some of these high earning chiefs, and while some of them are millionaires, I will tell you that the vast majority of the millionaires I work with that are first responders are sergeant and line level officers.
But they figured out how to save.
Correct.
They figured out how to do different plans that are available in departments and stuff. And they have postponed that gratification. They're not the ones that you're worried about.
No.
So when you take the ones that you are worried about, so for me, the potential recipe for disaster is lining up all the high risk behavior. The gambling, the alcohol, opiates has been a true epidemic.
Yeah.
And I will say this all the time. The officers that I have dealt with the opiate problems have never sought opiates for recreation. Every one of them had legitimate injuries that then hooked them. And that just became a vicious cycle. So in New Jersey, should an officer die by suicide and they are still on the job, they are entitled to 3.5 times their salary. And their widows get a 50% widow's pension. So unfortunately, I know of several officers, cannot tell you, I will never be able to tell you why they died or they chose suicide, but I will tell you that from an outsider's perspective, from the amount of debt that they were in, from conversations that were had or what have you. And as you said, people not saying, hey, let me help you figure this out. It really seems like you're in a spiral.
Yeah.
Is that it became very calculated, and their belief that their family, that they could clear up all debt by 3.5 times the salary, that the widow could then live an easier life with a 50% pension, and it becomes a calculated decision. It
does. It's a poor calculated decision, because I'll tell you that when it comes to the thought process of, well, at least my family's going to be debt free and they've got 50% of the salary going forward. Personal finance is 80% behavior and 20% head knowledge, as Dave Ramsey says. And it's kind of like the debt consolidation loans that I see people get. People call all the time. They're like, Nick, I'm going to consolidate my debt. And you think that's a good program? And usually my answer is no. Why? I go, because you can accomplish the same thing without consolidating the loan. And secondly, we didn't address the behavior. The behavior is we got ourselves in debt. And I can't tell you how many times I see people go get a debt consolidation loan to be 2 years later down the road, still in a debt consolidation loan, and have built all the credit cards back up. we didn't correct the behavior. And so we think it's a quick, easy way out because the debt's gone, not realizing that the problem wasn't the debt. The problem was how we obtained the debt, and we didn't correct that. It's one of the reasons I like the way Dave Ramsey preaches the debt snowball, is it makes you work through steps, and it makes you work through paying off your debt so that you realize how hard it is to do that, so you don't ever go back into that position again, hopefully.
It's like weight loss. So that you get it, so you're able to, for those years or for that year, whatever it is, that you watch everything, you weigh everything, you eat the food out of whatever, you got it.
Yeah.
But you haven't changed your thought process, and you haven't realized that you've entered into a lifestyle change.
Yep.
And that you've got to make different decisions.
Yep. I always tell people it's really hard to lose weight in America with a tub of ice cream in the freezer, because if you're like me, that ice cream is going to get eaten. It's really hard to become debt-free in America if you continue to use credit cards in debt. And Dave calls it the plastectomy, where you cut your credit cards up, and it's tough because it goes against everything we're taught in the culture now. There's two things I've studied extensively since getting involved in this movement. One is millionaires. How do they truly live? You'd be amazed. Those of you watching this at your departments, you have people sitting next to you at briefing that are millionaires, and you don't even realize it.
Absolutely.
And two, another thing we've got to factor in is the fact that marketing is a powerful tool, and the debt industry is fraught with one of the biggest marketing budgets you're ever going to see. I mean, a couple of years ago, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover spent collectively $4 billion on market research, studies, and marketing to get you to use their product. And so it's tough to break out of that mold when we've been taught really from a young age. I mean, my daughter started getting credit cards and purses and fake iPhones when she was 1. And so we teach our kids from age 1, hey, you got to have a pink plastic credit card in your purse. And you play games like the Game of Life, board game wise, and you got to have a Visa to win at the Game of Life. And then you walk into college and there's a table that says Life Takes Visa. And so we're trying to be counterintuitive to what we're taught and ingrained in our heads, that we don't need that debt to be successful. And we've got to realize that debt causes, to me, more problems than it solves.
So I'm trying to remember the American. Do you have daughters?
I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son.
So does your daughter play with American Girl dolls?
She does have an American Girl doll.
Okay. So
with the dress she can wear herself.
Oh yeah. Let me tell you, that was quite the industry. So my kids are quite a bit older. And we had gone to see one of the American Girl dolls did a movie. I'm trying to remember, just texted my daughter that would know. So, and it had this huge impact on me because it took place during the Great Depression. And you watched the kids, like if they went out and they sold eggs, it meant that their family was really, really poor. So the father had allegedly gone to Chicago. They're living in, I think, the Midwest, and had gone to Chicago to work at one of the family's car dealers and what have you, and was supposed to be sending money home. Anyway, money didn't come home, and all of a sudden, boarders had to come into the house. So you just kind of see what depression looks like, and about them ending up having to sell eggs, and this was a wealthy family. This was typically an upper middle class family that now this has just rattled them, and it's really just about survival. It's just about putting food on a table, about having a roof over one's head. And so I went home that night and I thought, girls, and I had been influenced by Jane Elliott, who had done a movie called The Eye of the Storm, which took place in 1963 in Riceville, Iowa. She is a woman. Riceville, Iowa had 1,200 people, all white, all middle class, and it is right after Martin Luther King had been killed. I'm sorry, in 1968. And one of the little boys had said to her, why did they kill a king last night? And so she needed to teach them about discrimination. And she just did this amazing job of what she did. So I kind of took a piece of that, as you take Dave Ramsey. I took a piece of Jane Elliott home. And I said to my daughters, who were probably about 5 and 7 at the time, and I said, do you think you know what it would be like to live in a depression, to really have to budget? And my kids were like, yes, Mom. I'm like, that's good. That's really good. So I said to my husband, who's always like, oh, shit, here we go. I'm like, go back to 1929. Give me a pie chart. Tell me what money we would be looking at to live on.
Yeah.
So he does this, and we allocate how much a mortgage would be, how much lights, utilities, gas, or what have you. So I say to the kids, we're going to have depression weekend. Kids couldn't have been happier. This was just the most exciting thing in the world. So I said to them, the only way that you can supplement money is, because they said, we're going to make bracelets, we're going to do whatever. I'm like, that's great. Ask Grandma if you can borrow money to make the bracelets to sell. But understand, we have to pay Grandma back.
Yep.
So, with a long story short, they sold bracelets, they did whatever. It was stifling hot that weekend. Have a, had a small house on the water. I'm like, we're going to go there because they have fans, because we can't afford air conditioning. We can't afford any of that. So it was miserable. So that night when we were driving down there, we had a budget in for gas, all of that. And they were hungry. And I said, we're going to get down there around 8:30. Here are your choices. We only have $22 for the weekend for food. If you can make it through the night, let's walk down to the store tomorrow morning so we can save money on gas, and we'll buy stuff, we'll budget. We need to go to bed hungry. I said, otherwise we'll go to the store tonight, but understand it's going to give us less food for the rest of the weekend. So by the time we were done with an incredibly uncomfortable weekend, we came back, we had driven back to the house, and we still had to do stuff. And we had one more meal, and we were checking out. And I remember that we had cheese, and we had done turkey burgers. And the guy rang it up, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't afford the turkey meat. I was really proud of my kids because neither one of them said, Mom, it's enough. They're like, Mom, there's turkey hot dogs. It's cheaper. We can, the hamburger buns are cheaper than the hot dog buns. We'll get those, and nobody needs cheese. And we came home, and it is still something today that we talk about, because when my daughter went to her very lovely summer camp, and she came home and she said, you need to buy water bottles, Mom. I'm like, why? She said, because they are selling them for $1 a water bottle. They are far cheaper in the store if you buy them by bulk.
Yeah.
So being able to teach fiscal responsibility and an understanding of real money, and although that they had worked for it, they hated paying my mother-in-law the $36 back. When a car drove by and they sold that bracelet for $5 in 3 minutes, they were like, this is easy.
Yeah.
It was easy, but for the next 5 hours, they sold nothing.
Yeah. It goes back to, we don't teach our kids about money. We don't talk about money. I mean, in my house growing up, money was a taboo subject. I never knew how much my parents made. I didn't know how much, were we struggling? Were we not? I didn't have those conversations. And we do the same thing in law enforcement work. We hire these cops, and for a lot of them making more money than they've ever made. And we don't do a good job teaching them about this. But more importantly, we don't do a good job of preparing their family for that. And, we know the divorce rate in law enforcement, and I don't have any statistical data to prove what I'm about to say, but I think a good chunk of our divorce rate is tied to our rookies. And my thought process behind this is when we teach an academy class, we always ask how many married folks do I have in here? And it's usually about a give or take 50% ratio. And I asked my 50% that raised their hand that were married, and I say, how many of you guys were cops before this? And almost none of them have been cops. And I go, think about this from the perspective of what we're about to put you through. We just handed you more money than you've ever made. We took you, and over the next 12 months, we're going to transform you into somebody that your spouse is not going to recognize. You're not going to be the same person that your spouse married 12 months from now. Sure. We do nothing to prepare your spouse for that. And then, oh, by the way, when you get out of training, let's throw you on deep nights, maybe for the first time in your life. So now you're fairly newly married, and you're working on deep nights, and you're not really seeing your family. Let's throw a new baby into the mix, and let's throw the quick financial crisis, which means I got to work overtime, which means I don't see my family. And you can see the vicious cycle that we start. We take something that becomes a money problem, but it ultimately was a result of not training our cops and spouses to understand the mental impacts. And the money becomes a symptom of the problem because we use the overtime to try to treat the symptom.
Very true. And by the way, the movies, just in case you want to show your kids, is Kit Kittredge.
Okay.
So, and that was the American Girl doll, was Kit Kittredge. Incredible movie, really. One of the things I decided, because I also grew up in a home where I watched a father who just, every time he paid bills, just yelled. So it's like everybody just hit different ends of the house when dad was paying bills. So it was always this miserable experience when he was going to pay them. So when, I was always a working mom, or two incomes. And I sat my girls down and I laid out all of the bills, and I'm like, you can start paying the bills.
Yeah.
And my kids were like, well, you need to write out a check. I mean, how many spouses? I mean, my parents' generation, where the wives had no idea, because the husbands always did it, of how to write out a check. Like, you need to write out a check. And when you guys think that we're doing great, you need to see the bills that are associated with it. And it really also became a eye-opener for them with but mom, it's just ...
Yeah.
To kind of realize, holy crap, that those things add up. One of the things that I had always encouraged people to do was, because credit cards were my enemy for years. I was certainly that person that was like, oh crap. So I had acquired the debt, and was fortunate enough, my dad actually did the one-time bailout and said, figure out how to never do that. So I got to pay him back, but that was easier. And what I realized is that I was losing track of what I put on a credit card. So what I would do is, every time I used the credit card, I'd enter the dollar amount into my checkbook. So by the time that bill came in, the money had already been allotted. So although my checkbook could look like it was negative $1,200, that money, when I got that check, went in, and I knew.
You really hit on a point there. And when people talk to me, what's the number one thing you can preach to people to help them with their money? And it's the dreaded B word, budgeting. We don't do budgets. And some of it's ingrained in us because, we're taught that budgets are constricting. But I talk about how I blame the fact that we don't do budgets in America partly on checkbooks, because how many people still write checks? Very few. I'm one of those. I always joke around and say, by the way, if you write checks, you're in the nerd category, because that's typically who writes checks, is us nerds.
All over it.
Yep. But at the flip side of that, I tell people, think back to that time when if you don't write checks anymore, that you did write checks. What did you have to do with that checkbook every week? You had to balance it, right? How do we balance our checkbook now? Hold on. Yeah, I'm good. Just buy it. And if you're married, pray and hope your spouse isn't doing the same thing at the exact same time. And we get scared of budgets, but budgets aren't scary. Budgets actually will open the door to help you spend more money. It will give you more control of your money. It'll help you work through marriage problems, because we're communicating about money. Yep. And I always tell people, don't think of a budget like a budget, because that budgets are evil, right? For my cops, we think of budgets like SWAT raids or search warrants. Just about every cop has been through a search warrant. And what's the number one thing that the officers have to do before they run the search warrant? Well, in my department, we have to do an ops plan. Where are we going? What's the house look like? What's my stack order? Who's breaching the doors? Who's going left? Who's going right? Well, that's your budget before the month begins, your pre-ops plan. And the most important thing that SWAT team does is when they get back, they debrief. They do an after action plan. And that's really what a budget is. Doing our ops plan to see what we're going to do for the month, and then doing our after action plan throughout the month to make sure that everything we think was going to happen go according to plan. And when you put it like that, oftentimes it clicks with a lot of these cops and goes, oh, it's just a SWAT raid. I can do that now.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Whatever ruminates, but that absolutely makes so much sense. And not only do you have an op plan going in, you typically have more than one op plan.
Yes.
So it's also having, okay, if this doesn't work, then if you can't buy it at this store,
yeah,
then can we live without it, or do we need to, like, how do you do this? And you're right.
Yeah.
That communication is so important.
Yeah.
And it's about the uncomfortable. And it's interesting because the only reason why money is uncomfortable is because you don't want to be told no.
Yep. Well, and I'll give you a story with that. Same thing goes with our spouses. I'm the nerd in my family. My wife, Carrie, is the free spirit. She can't stand the budget word, not because she doesn't want to be in a budget, because it doesn't interest her. And she knows that the nerd here has got the budget handled. But at the same token, she's got to be involved. And we take that control over the money and we kind of go overboard sometimes. And I tell my cops, number one question I get asked by my cops when it comes to budgets and marriages is, Nick, how do I get my spouse on board? Because every time I talk to my spouse, it's a fight. And I don't want to fight, so I just give in. And my response is, how many of us have been through verbal judo, right? Your mouth will talk you out of more fights than your fist will, won't it? Well, use our law enforcement training. Why don't we use verbal judo on our spouse with this? You go, well, what do you mean? Well, okay, I'll give you a good example. If Carrie goes and buys something on Amazon, Amazon can be anything in our budget, right? That can be clothes for the kids. It can be gifts for the kids, stuff for the dog, you name it. Who knows what Amazon is in a budget? Well, if I walk into that living room and I look at Carrie and I say, what'd you buy on Amazon? She's already on her heels. What do you mean what I buy on Amazon? I'm an adult. I'll buy whatever the heck I want to. But if I use my verbal judo and I go in there and I say, hey, Carrie, I saw you got something on Amazon. Which category in the budget do I put it in? Well, it's different now. Now it's not, well, he's mad I bought something on Amazon. It's, well, he just wants to know where to put it. And so I bought $150 worth of clothes for the kids. Cool, I'll go put that in the clothing budget. Well, if I go back and I put it in the clothing budget and what we talked about was $100, but she spent $150, I don't march back into the living room and say, you screwed the budget up. You went over, we said $100, you spent $150. What are you thinking? I go back in and I say, hey, Carrie, what we bought for clothes for the kids, notice I said we, because we made the kids together and we earned it together. What we spent on money for the kids for clothes put us over budget on what we talked about. Can you come help me balance this? Can you help me figure out where do I pull that extra $50? Do we want to pull it out of our restaurants for the month? Do we want to pull it over, maybe roll it to next month? Now we don't have a fight and she's involved in it and we worked through the problem together.
So I'm going to stick with your SWAT example, which I love, is you also don't go in alone.
True.
You don't do a raid by yourself.
True.
So you've got partners and you've got to be able to tell your partners what the plan is. So you guys are in this together. And when the plan doesn't go right, as you said, it's the after action. But to be able to treat your spouse truly as that partner that you're breaching that door with, and that both of you need to come out of it alive, that how do you ensure that will happen? And go ahead.
Well, it's 100% true. I mean, we put a bulletproof vest on, we run into gunfights, and we expect our partner to have our back. We would take a bullet for our brothers and sisters. But when you're going into a financial, whether it's a catastrophe, a financial crisis, your spouse is your partner. They may not have the vest on, but they're in this with you, and you take a bullet for your spouse just like they would for you. And in the heat of the moment, we work through the problem, we fix it, we're solution based. We got to do the same thing with our spouses when it comes to money. I tell people all the time, that, you talk about the fights and everything when it comes to money and when it comes to budgeting, I always tell my couples is, look, you're both spending money in manners that is driving each other bonkers. And you've got to be humble enough to look at each other and go, I got skeletons in my closet. I'm going to spend money that's going to drive you crazy, and you're going to do the same thing. And we're not going to get mad at each other with it. We're going to talk through it. We're going to find solutions. And we actually have fail safes in our marriage when it comes to that, so that if I do go through one of my spending moments, we have mechanisms in place to talk about it, or that we've set aside so that it doesn't become a fight.
And it's wonderful. And one of the things that makes me really sad, I have a wonderful relationship with the officers. I'm very blessed to have that. It is heartbreaking to me many times to listen to them truly trying to please their spouses, who they have picked for whatever reasons, good, bad, and different, that I don't care about, but they seem to be insatiable.
Yeah.
That at some point in time, you can't be held emotionally hostage or financially hostage. And that a lot of times is it. So if you can't talk about the finances, and if you can't get somebody on board, I think the other part of it that they don't want to talk about is, I'm in a really toxic marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've heard the phrase out there, it is huge back here, it's cheaper to keep her.
I have heard that phrase.
So, when they look at having to deal with their pensions and their thises and their that's, and I remember when my brother was going through a divorce, I'm like, because I have dealt with so many things that you cannot fix by money. So I was like, if you can throw money at an emotional issue and it goes away, you'll always make money.
Yeah. For my cheaper to keeper folks,
yeah,
I'll tell you that in my experience, it's not cheaper to keeper, because all you're doing is kicking the can down the road, which means they get more of the pension down the road, or they get more of the assets down the road. It's no different than you got that call for service and you're going to that crazy person that calls you because their neighbor's watering their car. I mean, we've all had stupid calls like that. And you're like, I got to go tackle this call. We can't avoid it. We go in and we tackle the call. We figure out a way to work through it and muddle through it, whether it's a crazy person calling us or whether it's a serious family disturbance. We can't go to a family disturbance where there's, a child involved and a husband and wife are fighting and there's violence. And we can't just say, it's easier just to come back and do it again another day. But yet we go in our marriages and we do the same thing. We kick the can down the road. And that's what's kind of crazy to me from a law enforcement perspective is, I talk about one of the number one pitfalls of first responders when it comes to money is failing to plan. We don't plan anything with our money, but yet we plan every call for service out in detail. Where are we going to go? What's the path? How many houses are we going to park down? How are we going to hug this tree line? Who's going to go here? Who's going to go there? We don't shy away from the conflict and the problem at hand when we're on duty. So why, when we get into the marriage, do we do the same thing there? Because all it does is cause problems further down the road. Take that officer. We all got officers that don't need to be officers, i.e. they either sit under a shade tree and don't do anything, or it's like, man, that guy was here yesterday. Why didn't he fix this problem yesterday? Now I got to deal with it. You're doing the same thing if you're doing that in the it's cheaper to keeper phase. You're that officer now, and you're saying, we'll deal with it later, but eventually it's got to get dealt with.
And that cheaper to keeper typically leads to a whole lot of other really piss poor decisions
Yes.
down the line that it is emotionally not cheaper to keeper.
We talk about money, and money is not the problem. Money is never the problem. Money is the symptom of the problem. We're the problem. Now, that's a good thing, because when we know we're the problem, we know we can fix ourselves. And if we fix ourselves, the symptoms get better with it.
Yeah. No, it's great. Is there anything that I haven't addressed? And I'm going to have you certainly put out your information there. I want everybody to kind of know how they can reach you. Is there anything that I didn't ask or that you wanted to cover that I didn't today?
No, well, if there's one other thing, outside of budget that I really like to hit on, that's probably the second most important topic. It's not a fun one, but it's one we all got to deal with. And it's that we're all going to die, whether it's natural in the line of duty, hopefully not by suicide and those kinds of manners. The other issue that we deal with is that I'd be willing to bet that about 80% of us in this industry don't have a will. And we've got to do a will. We've got to do legacy planning. I'm fortunate. I've been a member of the Texas Municipal Police Association for about 18 years now. And I mean, TMPA will do your will for free. I mean, I know FOP does as well, and those other entities. And legacy planning, how do we make sure our family knows where everything's at? We, on our website, financialcop.com, we have a free legacy download where you can organize your finances for your family in the sense of they know where your bank accounts are, what your pension is, your life insurance to your work, all those important aspects. And we really got to make sure that we take care of our family. And I bring that up from a wellness perspective because we all want what's best for our family, and we all don't want our family to suffer more than they would if a tragic event happened. But yet we don't take that step to do a will, and we cause them to suffer more than we wanted them to suffer.
So important. Again, please give your website and a download and how people can reach you, Nick.
So financialcop.com is our website. That legacy go bag is a free download on the website. You can always reach out in emails at nick@financialcop.com. You've got myself. I've got Mike Parker, who's a retired sergeant from the Mesquite Police Department, and Keaton Burke, who's an officer from Plano. We actually are potentially about to open up a California office and a couple other areas as well.
Wonderful. And
we're here to help in any way we can. If you're in crisis and you're hurting with money, reach out. We coach cops through crisis 100% free. That's what we got to take care of our own. And so if you're hurting with money or you need a quick question or some advice on how to get through a crisis, reach out. We'll take care of that completely free for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on Steph Therapy with Stephanie Samuels. Thank you for being a supporter of mine, of Copline, of your brothers and sisters, and just unwavering and in the support and the understanding of the 4 prongs that need to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And the importance of that 4th prong, which, I'm not so sure that 4th prong isn't woven throughout, the other 3, but would love to see the financial components absolutely dealt with. I think some of the pitfalls that our recruits end up being trapped in would be quite helpful. So thank you so very much for your time. And I look forward to seeing everybody again next Sunday on StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels at 7 p.m. on Facebook Live. Take care.